Hi, this is the Tempter podcast where we explore the latest open source Linux and IoT technologies and workflows. Today we have a special guest with us, Matthew Rassi. Matthew is an expert in lean manufacturing. So we thought it'd be interesting to talk to somebody from the manufacturing space, since we hear the term lean a lot in the development space, and kind of learn about the origins and how the thinking in manufacturing might apply in development. So welcome, Matthew.
I'm excited to be here, Cliff. Looking forward to sharing together.
Yeah.
Hi, Matthew.
Yeah,
Hi,
we have Kim with us as well. So Matthew, maybe if you could just give us a brief overview of your career and what you do now.
Absolutely. So I started my career in manufacturing, spent 15 years in lighting and 10 years in medical. So both highly regulated and unregulated, ran several plants of different sizes. And as the years went by, I started fading out from the day-to-day operations and try to get into consulting. So each time my review came up, I asked for more time off so I could do some consulting. And I started consulting one day a week. And I did that for 5 years and kind of learned how I could help companies. And the last 2 years, I've just had incredible growth in myself as I've worked in many different industries, from food production to fabric buildings to heavy metal to sheet metal and washers and molding to government processes, and seeing that the concepts of lean can be applied across so many different industries. I worked for 20 Helping Hands, which was my wife and I and 8 children at the time. And we've had a number of different businesses under that name, and now I'm using it for the consulting business.
Yeah, that's great. So at this point, you consult with a number of different organizations and basically just help them with lean concepts.
Yeah, I'm typically working with 4 organizations at a time, coming in every other week or every week, working with both top leadership, supervisors, and even the floor level. I like to get everybody involved and working towards making process improvement, continuous improvement, learning the lean fundamentals, engaging the team. There's so many different aspects that organizations can utilize to be able to make improvements.
Sure. So just a quick side question. Do you typically travel to the site, or do you work remote, or how does that work in your business?
I am typically traveling to the site, and most of my clients have been within the area. So I'm in Chicagoland, so I have plenty in Chicago, and then downstate as well, a number of companies that I've worked with. And on-site has just worked best. Certainly during COVID, we were able to do remote.
Sure.
So lean is an interesting concept, and I think Cliff and we try to apply it in our world of software development as well to what we understand of it. And I think so. What's if you can describe what is lean and what are its origins, and with some examples, or help us understand the term lean.
Yeah, absolutely. Lean can mean many different things. I just posted recently, what's the opposite of lean? That can give us some insights as well as to what lean is. But the concept of lean is to go for flow and to reduce waste. We want to be able to supply to the customer what they're looking for without all of the extras that end up coming along. And trying to reduce that waste is the effort. Of course, it started out of the Toyota production system back in the 1950s and has continued to progress and change in different ways. It's about being more efficient with the things that we have. So my moniker is helping increase output without more machines or more people, utilizing the resources that we have. In a typical operation, less than 10% is value added. 90% is waste, whether it's in weighting or motion or so many different things. And I would suspect that's true in the software development world too.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So.
Yeah, I think we basically have very similar problem space as you described, and we try to do a lot of automation, try to do a lot of taking more machines to do the work rather than inserting human beings as much to kind of scale it out. But yeah, I think it's an interesting concept from that angle. I guess goes cross industries, and in fact, it's more of a process rather than a technology for specific industry, I guess.
Yeah, can you give us a few examples about how lean has helped someone? Just so we could kind of get a sense for what it does.
Absolutely. So some of the things that Lean really helps with is making things visual, having visual systems. So I recall working for a company that had their engineering queues. So they were an engineer to order company, and they were struggling with their lead times. Their lead times were very excessive, and they were hoping to get them down. And in examining their process, they really didn't know how much they had in their engineering queue at any one time. They had a listing in a spreadsheet somewhere, but it wasn't visual. It was also done on a first in, first out basis. And so some engineering projects, they take a few days to a week, and others can get done in an hour or two. And since they were doing first in, first out, everything was getting log jammed whenever they'd have a long one. And so we made a couple of very simple changes. First, we made it visual so everybody could see every job that was up there. And we went for what Lean is going for, which is throughput. So our goal is throughput, not necessarily first in, first out. So we balanced it. In the mornings, we would work on the small jobs and get them through, and then chip away at the big job. But every morning we'd come in and we'd knock out those small ones. So we were allowing the throughput. So every job that was getting through very quickly. And the big jobs, which actually there was an expectation from those customers that it would take longer. Of course, they did take longer to do the engineering, but instead of holding everything up. And so that's just one example of utilizing visual systems. If you can get your queues out for visual systems, so that may look like something like a Gantt chart, making sure the Gantt charts for the various projects are visible and people are aware of them when you do your project updates, your milestones, all these types of things that people are aware of what's there. The other thing is reducing clutter, right? Focus is not just on what you're focused on, but the things you're not going to do. And so what is filling up your people's time? And what was filling up your time? Can we check our calendars and see how much time are we actually spending in these different areas? And is that appropriate? Is that really what we want ourselves doing, or those that are working for us? If they come back and say, I spent 8 hours on this and 15 hours on this and 10 hours on this, and you're like, I thought you spent 40 hours on this and we're getting 10 hours a week. I wonder why my development is taking so long.
Mm-hmm. So can Lean philosophy be applied to software? So I think you mentioned earlier about the concept of flow in Lean manufacturing. So how do you see it can be kind of like applied to software development cycles?
Yes, so you want to look at it from many different aspects. You can look at it from the larger global thing of like concept to cash, right? And so it might be in your quoting. So how do you quote projects? And how long does that take? What is the process? Is there a process? Or is it each time you get hit by somebody else in the organization works to build a quote? Or do you have a process? So standard work is a big part of how you actually get flow, because we do it the same. Our customers are expecting us to be able to perform at a certain level. And if we all do it differently, they don't know what they're going to get. It depends who they talk to. It depends when they call this month, next month, this office, that office. So some of those things. So from a very high level, you look at the value stream map of beginning until it becomes a completed project. But then you can look at bite-sized chunks. So don't try to bite off the whole thing at one time, but let's just look at your pain points. So the advantage we have in manufacturing is that we can physically see where the problems are on the floor. You can see the piles. And I tell people, I can walk in your plant and in 2 hours, I can tell you where your problems are. It's where your piles are. Now in the office and with software development, it's probably more difficult because you don't literally see the piles. And that's why we've got to get the queues visual so that we can see how much work is sitting in front of each person, or where are things at? How do the handoffs actually happen? That's the flow that we're looking for. So what types of communications are done? If I need approvals, why do I need approvals? I always ask this question. What percentage of your approvals don't get approved? Because if 99% are getting approved, do we really need to have all these levels of approval? So just little things like that, from the very smallest questions up to the medium, until your overall flow of your process addresses that.
So you talk about running towards the problem. I've seen that on your LinkedIn feed several times. And how do you apply that, or what does that mean?
Yeah, that is a major philosophy difference from most companies, and actually as individuals. We are often, if we make a mistake, we want to recover from it and hope nobody sees it. And so instead of that, I have a number of areas that we focus on. The first one is that the longer it takes us to discover a problem, the more costly it's going to be, and not by a factor of from $100 to 110, but it goes 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. It works its way as a problem moves through the organization, not being caught. It gets way more expensive, and the resources it takes to fix it. So the sooner we can find problems and even celebrate that we found problems quickly, it will be less costly for us. It's kind of like an illness or an injury that you just leave and it just doesn't get better by itself. The second aspect then is the broadcasting of our problems. Like in your organization, everyone should know your top 3 quality issues. So in your software development, what are the top 3 things that are likely to go wrong? Just tell everybody about that in your organization, and they'll be watching for those 3, and your quality issues cut in half just right there by taking care of those 3 or being aware of them. But oftentimes it's kind of hidden. And so for ourselves, as we make mistakes, if I make a mistake, I need to say, hey, yesterday I made a mistake. I want you all to be aware of it so you don't make the same mistake. And instead of each person in the organization having to learn the mistakes on their own, we become a learning organization, learning from each other. But what does that take? Of course, that takes humility. And so if we are in a proud, or we don't want others to know of our failures, or failures get persecuted, like, what? You screwed up. How could you ever do that? Like, we have to admit that we are willing to make mistakes because we are willing to move forward and try things. And therefore, mistakes, like in the Japanese society where lean comes from, mistakes are celebrated. Like the reds on the board are the opportunities and they drive towards them. And here in America, often we just want green, everything, a participation ribbon, all these things like green, green, green. But the reality is that the opportunities are where the red is. And so if we could have the right visual systems showing us where the problems are, we can address them much quickly and be more successful.
So it's something like in the software world, they say that, move towards the beginning of time. So essentially, if your time process begins here, and then, if you can kind of like put a lot of your processes at the very beginning, the cost is lower. And if you catch the problem right there, it's way, way less expensive than if you, say, caught it at the customers or, elsewhere. So I think, that's awesome. And I think I like the concept of how you talk about learning from your mistakes and broadcasting it. And I think that's the one big problem. And do you think it's a culture problem in that organization, or how can you address that issue? Essentially, how can you promote that? That people are more, allowed, or they're provided safe spaces for being vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a big part of this leadership role, right? Is in making sure people feel safe. So I ask these questions. I say, is there room for improvement? And we all need to say there's room for improvement for everything. Even if we made improvements and we feel like it's getting very close to perfect, like if we think it's perfect, then we become complacent. So the first thing is there room for improvement? And then are we willing to try new things? And on both of those, people are usually like, yes, okay. Are we willing to fail? Right? And if we're not willing to fail, then the other two, the answers to those don't matter. And so we have to be willing to fail so that when something does go wrong, we don't say, I knew that would never work. But instead we say, hey, we need to pivot. That one didn't work. So I'm a big fan of good to great, the concept of first bullets, then cannonballs. So we'll try it out, we'll pilot it, and we'll see how this works. If it works great, then we roll it out across the board. And if it doesn't, then we pivot and we make those changes. So this is a huge part of the culture. It's not just some lean tools that you go and implement. It is really a leadership, a change in the style of leadership and embracing this with leadership. So it's got to start at the top, especially something like there of embracing mistakes, the leader being willing to share things that they have done wrong so that others don't make that same mistake. Starting with, I should have started lean sooner could be one example of, we've really been missing out on the opportunity. We've just been resting on our laurels, or we've been focused on the wrong things.
Yeah. So you mentioned starting at the top. Have you ever seen this be successful without the people at the top of the organization embracing it?
I have not. So I do a qualification when I do my discovery visit. I ask for the organizational chart. And then once they hand me the org chart, I say, oh, we have it upside down. And I flip it over and I say, we as leaders need to be supporting our team. And the way that the leader responds to that tells me everything I need to know. Because if they're like, no, what are you talking about? I'm the boss. That's the way it is. Like, perfect. I don't need to be here because it's not going to work. It's just not. But most leaders, they know in their heart, they just don't know how to do it. I don't know how to support my people. I've just kind of fallen into this role, or I've taken in kind of a command control thing because it's been chaos and I've had to get it straight. But now I really want to do it right. How do I do that? Okay, that's where the coaching can come in and be successful. So the first thing is, are they willing to flip that organizational chart and realize that? And then the second one is, are they looking for growth? Because if they think they're going to do lean just so they can get rid of some people and reduce their costs, it's better for their team if I don't show up. So I'm not interested in being there unless they're seeking growth. And so those are the organizations that I'm after. And that's what I constantly talk about on LinkedIn, because that's how I get my clients. And I'm attracting the kind of people that want that. And the ones that don't want it, that's fine. They can find somebody else or use a different process or just not be successful.
Sure. One thing we hear in the operation space is blameless postmortems, and what that means is if you have an operational failure with a computer system, we figure what's out and we don't blame people. We figure out the process problems and go forward. So it sounds similar to this. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I coach leaders that whenever there's a problem, we talk about the process and how we can improve it. And whenever there's a success, we get people's names out there for the individual, for the team. We are addressing and bringing out and highlighting what a great job they've done. So this goes a long ways of recognition. I talk about the 5 shares. I'm a firm believer that the more information that individuals have, the better decisions are going to make. And so as leaders, we've got to be sharing not just information, but sharing recognition, sharing opportunities, sharing responsibilities, sharing ideas. All of these things, the more that we share with our team, the better decisions they're going to make. And sometimes I'll ask, now, how many decisions a day do you think each of your team members make? Oh, not that many. They just do their jobs. I'm sorry, but their entire job is making decisions. And if you're not giving them enough information about the organization, about the type of customer you have, about the end goal of the project, about their goals, they're not going to be able to do what you're looking for them to do because they don't know what it is.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. So in your starter handbook that you can download from Matthew's website, there's this concept called the House of Lean. And is that kind of an original thing you came up with, Matthew, or is that kind of an industry term, or what is that?
Yeah, that's
mean?
really an industry term. That's not something that I've come up with. I have refined it, and I utilize different tools for different organizations. So definitely, as I do my discovery visit, I see that based on the type of manufacturer they are or the type of business and process they're doing, there's going to be different tools that are much more applicable. And there's probably 50 tools that you could stick in there. I've just got 15 in there that are the most common, but I will often switch out a few of those to fit what actually that organization is going to need. And there's some that just are not necessary or are not going to fit, are not real applicable for their type of business. So I could see that same type of thing happening in the software industry, where some of these things, like a point of use storage, may not be super applicable for software. But the cellular flow concept of how do I get my handoffs to be seamless absolutely would apply.
With this House of Lean, it sounds like it's kind of a collection of techniques or tools. And are these often like software tools or more just paper tools, or?
Sure, that's a great question. So it's very little technology is necessary. So it can be used. Idea boards and some of these things, you can go into the digital realm, but most of them are visual type systems and engaging the team. So it's really a framework for getting process improvements. And I'll tell you why I use the House of Lean versus just attacking waste. So Lean is also removing waste, and there's a 7 wastes or 8 wastes of underutilized talent and movement and waiting and all. Like waiting's a massive one, I'm sure, in the software development world. But trying to remove waste is very difficult because we have to do things. And so just saying, okay, yeah, let's eliminate waiting. If I didn't have to wait anymore, we'd be so much more efficient. But how do you do that? And so what I found is that the application, those 5 years that I spent trying to remove waste with companies, was not very successful. So after a few years, I realized just approaching and trying to tackle waste is a very difficult concept for people to understand. Like movement, I'm not supposed to move, and yet I have to go over there. Like, what am I supposed to do? And so it was frustrating for people. And what I found is that by building a framework of tools that can be utilized to look for waste, and these are structures that can be used to help remove the waste and get the efficiency and flow that we're looking for. In addition, I found that it's layered. Like at the bottom is where we're building our muscle memory. Things like 5S and some of our basic systems are things that build our daily discipline. So daily discipline is something that you've got to do it whether you feel like it or not. That's what daily discipline is. And there's so many things in work life and actually in home life that if you don't do the daily discipline, you really pay for it. I think of my children with homework. If they don't do the homework, that's fine. Then they fail the test. Now they have to make up the test and redo the homework. And It just gets worse and worse. If you would have just done the homework, the daily discipline, you would understand the concepts, you'd pass the test. It's actually an easier life. So choose your hard. Choose your hard. I say that all the time. Daily discipline, doing the thing. So starting at the bottom with change management, and 5S, and some of these things builds up. And of course, you see at the top there is flow and continuous improvement. Those are what you're going for, but you've got to build those foundational steps to get there.
Yeah, that helps a lot to kind of understand what you're doing there. So, yeah, so we hear a phrase in Lean, standard work. So what does standard work mean?
Excellent question. So standard work is the things that help you. So imagine bowling for the first time, or taking your kids bowling, right? They get up there and they go to roll the ball, and it goes in the gutter, and it goes in the gutter, and it goes in the gutter. So what do? We put up these rails on the side, the bumpers, so that they don't go in the gutter. In fact, the smallest kid can get up there and just barely push the ball, and it'll roll down there real slow, and it hits pins, and they're successful, right? They're successful even though they don't know what they're doing. Now, to get really good, they're going to need to remove the bumpers and practice and practice and practice. So that's all of us in our jobs. We've got to practice to get good. But at the beginning, we don't know what we're doing. So we need standard work. We need work instructions, or what I like to call job aids, a picture that shows what's supposed to look like. This can be a completed form, a software. Here's the formats that we use, and the 3 top things that you need to do to be successful. And then on the back, it needs to say, here's the 3 things to watch out for. And you just make this for all of your different tasks that you have, whether it is in the format of how you do something, the forms that need to be filled out, what information you need from a customer. Make some job aids and use these to help guide that standard work, almost like bumpers on a bowling alley, so that you get better and better. And then with practice, you won't even have to look at the job aid. But if somebody comes to help you out, or somebody new gets trained, then they can look at that and see it. Another example is like a guide. Like if you're going on a hike, right? If we're going to go on a hike in the wilderness, what do I need to take? Well, I need to take a map. Well, that's not really helpful, because half of us don't know how to read maps anymore. Or when I look at a map, it doesn't show that there's a big hill here. So I don't even know what I'm doing, right? So, okay, forget the map. We all have phones. So we take our phone, but then we get out there and there's no cell service. So now we're really shot, right? So what do we need when we're going to go on a hike from point A to point B? We need a guide. We need someone who's been there before that can show us the way. In fact, they've probably done it so many times, they know all the tricks and tips. This is us with fellow employees, teaching them a new role. We are the guides. And if we would share with them all the tips and tricks and things that we've learned from doing it over and over and over, they will get from point A to point B so much better. But instead, we say, oh, here's the work instructions, go ahead and do it. And maybe they know how to read them, maybe they don't. That's like the map, right? Maybe they know, maybe they don't. Or you say, hey, just Google it and you can just see how to do it. Well, come on, it's specific. They need to know how to do it. And so we as guides need to be helping them along. We need to have job aids that help them. So this is what standard work is. It's the consistency of doing it the same every single time, because that's what our clients are looking for. They're looking for steady output, even though we have variables. We have different softwares. We have different people working on it. We're working in it at different times. We're going across different time zones, all these variables. And at the end, we need to be consistent. So we've got to get all these variables to have less variability. It actually improves your quality, your output. All these things happen with standard work.
Sure. Yeah, I can think of like get commit format, if we have a standard way to log the changes we made. And
yeah, some guardrails, right? So essentially that's what I saw, in software terms, if I were to translate that. You put guardrails, best practices, right? How to do things, maybe, coding standards, right? And a lot of time people talk about, hey, why do you care so much about coding standard? Because a lot of times we talk about saying that, hey, code is not read by the computer. Code is for the humans to be read. So, consistency there helps you in doing the second project, or somebody else coming along and doing, the next project with you. So, there are certain tools in software industry for, checking consistency of how the program is written and sort of things. And a lot of in software developer community, those tools are kind of quite prevalent these days now that they realize the value. But essentially that's, in my mind, value that I guess the standard work has added, or is probably even more as softwares are getting more complex. I guess this is even more important than before.
Absolutely. Those foundational principles. And people will be like, well, it's just common sense. But
Mhm.
it's not, because we all have different backgrounds and we all think differently. And so it's got to be put out there as standards and followed. So that's where that daily discipline, like, I didn't have time. I didn't have time to code it like that. I just had to get it done. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. We have to do it right every time, whether we feel like it or not, whether we think we have time or not, because it will impact those in the future if we don't do that.
So you talk about efficiency and bottlenecks. How do you identify them or address them, or how do you look at that?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we realize when we're trying to make improvements is that we can't improve everything. We don't have time to improve everything. And so how are we going to focus our improvement efforts? We're going to focus our improvement efforts where the bottleneck is, where the known problems are, or where the issues are that could really open up our capacity. And so wherever that might be within the process, we have to first identify that. And that's where we want to work on our problems. Because if we can improve the throughput at the bottleneck, we improve the entire system's throughput. If we don't, then we spend, and this is why so many companies, they spend, hey, let's get some more developers, let's get some more machines, let's do some of this stuff with AI and those types of things. And they're fixing all these things that are not the bottleneck, and they're adding more expense, and they're not going to get more throughput unless it's at the bottleneck. So the bottleneck concept, or the theory of constraints, of where is your constraint at, is super critical. And one of the other things that people may or may not realize is that it may move. So as we build capacity in one area, our bottleneck may now show up in a different place. And so as we start to grow and get that, we have to continue to stay alert and aware of where our bottlenecks are. And so oftentimes very helpful tools to do that is some type of value stream map, where you go through all the different steps in your process. What are your resources? How long does it take there? How big is the queue? All those types of things to figure out where are we getting log jammed. And again, if we have our queues visual, it's easy to see where we're getting log jammed because it's consistently there. And that's right there where that log jam is. That's that bottleneck that we want to get freed up. That's where we want to put our resources for continuous improvement, because you can't improve everything. We have limited resources. We know that.
Yeah. So you talk about visualizing things, and one thing that's popular in the software world is a Kanban board, basically 3 columns, backlog, doing, and done. Does that come from manufacturing, or?
Yes, Kanban boards does. Now, in my experience, those first 5 years when I was doing it, anytime I mentioned Japanese words, everybody got all nervous and would go hide. And so I quit using Japanese words generally. So I still use Kaizen because I don't know another word that means continuous improvement like that in English. But almost everything else, including Kanban, whether it's Kanban boards or Kanban scheduling, I'll call it a 2-bin system, try to make it as simple as possible. But if you're already familiar with that term, absolutely, that is a way to make it visual so that we can see and help prioritize, because a huge part of this is prioritizing our efforts, our team's efforts, so that we're working on the right things, and from a goal-based standard, not a micromanagement. Because the other thing that can happen with visual systems is somebody starts micromanaging because now they can see it all, and that is not helpful. So I need it from the more of the goal-based visual, so that are we moving forward towards our goals, and can we see where the bottlenecks are? We make it visual and you'll get much better flow. The success rates with the organizations that I work with are phenomenal, and I can't take all the credit for that. They're the ones actually doing the work, but it is because we're taking out, I don't go to the machine and tweak it so it goes 10% faster. It's not that machine. It's not your coding itself. It's all the steps in between and those handoffs that are causing your delays.
Yeah. Yeah, I think oftentimes, the identifying the bottlenecks is the key, and I think sometimes you misplace your bottlenecks, and in programming world, people start optimizing their code even before it is complete. For example, right? Because they think that, oh, that particular function should be as fast as possible, only to find out that they will only use it once in the flow, right?
Yep.
So essentially, I think sometimes these are premature, identifications that people do, and there are other things. But what you describe here is actually key, is to kind of really go down to that bottlenecks, figure them out, and unleash your capacity. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's
So
a great example. That's just a great example of what can happen. What ends up happening is people try to optimize their little silo, right?
yeah,
But what I'm looking for is flow. So those silos can be as optimized and just absolutely have the greatest capacity, but whatever has the lowest capacity is actually where I need the work to be done,
right.
not just in optimizing. And so perfection can be a huge detriment to excellence because
Yeah.
we keep trying to get perfect and perfect in our silos. Great example.
Hmm. So let's talk about value. So I think so there's what's the role of value in manufacturing, and then how software teams can ensure that the value that they're delivering is optimal, is maximum, in fact, for their customers.
That is a great question. And it's very challenging to define because what we're really looking for is what does a customer actually want or need and eliminate everything else. All the rest is waste. And overproduction or excessive processing is one of the challenges that in manufacturing, like, oh, let's take those burrs off. Let's make it really pretty. I remember I was in lighting and we did an analysis for the back of our light fixtures, which were getting painted. And we realized the electrician's the only one that sees them. It sticks it in the ceiling and nobody sees the back of the light fixture. So why are we putting all this paint on? So we started putting minimal. All we did was a rust prevention. And the owner came through one day and he's like, hey, these lights are hardly even painted. What are we doing shipping these? And they call me over and I said, we did an analysis. We talked with sales. There's no value in painting the back of it. He's like, oh, how much are we going to save? I'm like, we're going to save several $100,000 in paint because we're not painting the back of the light fixture. He's like, oh, great job. I'm glad you investigated, right? But in our own minds, like, it just doesn't look as pretty or, they'll love this feature, right? I think automotive is facing this right now. All the features they're putting in a vehicle, like, I'm trying to get from point A to point B, and these are nice, but look how much a vehicle costs now. Now you can't even afford it. So the value is in what is the customer willing to pay for and eliminating all the waste. And so that's where the real challenge is in manufacturing and figuring out what that is. And then in software, I'm sure it's the same. How are you solving? And so how do you focus on that? You've got to have customer feedback. We've got to be talking as directly, be as close to the customer as possible, really give sales an opportunity to speak into the process. Oftentimes sales gets the order, throws it over the wall, and then no one talks to sales again until we're done. All they do is give updates as to where it's at, not telling them the technical challenges and things of here's what we had to do and adjust. What do you think? And so that communication, I think, can be much improved to be able to add value to the customers.
Yeah, that's great. One thing we run into in software development is the temptation to implement features that are kind of neat and we think we might need someday, and maybe implement architectures that aren't needed now, but we think we may need someday. And one of my associates told me years ago, he says, you never do that because you're never going to use it anyway. So his philosophy was never implement anything you don't need because you probably won't ever use it anyway. So
yeah, it's the classic waste.
Yeah. So we talk about waste and waste reduction, and I think you've mentioned overproduction, and another thing kind of listed in some notes here is excessive documentation. So we talked about standard work as being, somewhat documentation, but now we have excessive documentation being waste. How do you divide that line there?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I run across this especially in creating work instructions on how to do it, right? And you can spend forever making a work instruction and it still doesn't tell you how to do it, right? We've all tried to put something together with work instructions that just were not great. And in fact, you go to the IKEA model where it's just pictures, and sometimes that's a little bit confusing, but we go back to our Lego days where it's spelled out step by step with the pictures, right? Pictures are worth so much and we don't use pictures enough. So pictures for the format, for where the things need to be completed. Oftentimes, like for quality type things, we'll have this huge form that has to get filled out. But if everything's good, you really only need to fill out the top 4 things. So make that the top and make that a green box. And then if something's wrong, now you have to go down and do the rest. But our forms aren't laid out like that. So then you don't know if the form's complete or not complete. But the concepts of the waste and the challenges that we face with them are much more extensive than we even realize, right? Again, typically 10% is actually adding value. So we look at the total lead time of how long it takes us to do a project, and the actual coding for that is such a small amount, then why does it take so long, right? Well, it's sitting in queues. So waiting is a massive part. If we could project manage better or make it visual so people knew when the next step had to come, waiting is a huge one, and not utilizing the resources we have. So oftentimes our teams are kind of siloed in their bucket. They know how to do other things, but they're not authorized to do other things, or just stay where you're at. We're not utilizing those as much as we can. So as you work through each of those different wastes, you just become aware of, wow, there is so much here that we can be working on. And again, I can't do everything. So we've got to focus on those bottlenecks, but each individual person can be working in their own area. So like the master bottleneck in each one of us, we also have bottlenecks individually, that there are things that if we just did a little bit better in this area, our output individually would go up so much more, right? So I don't want to optimize my silo too much, but there are opportunities for everyone. And continuous improvement is not just the big chunks that we do as a team, but each person's individual. If I get better today than I was yesterday, and tomorrow I'm better again, that's what continuous improvement is.
So how do you break the silos, essentially? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yes, there's a number of tools to use on that. First of all, stepping back and casting the vision. So as a leader, sharing, this is what we're trying to do, and then getting your cues visual so people can see, you can work really hard to finish yours, and then you dump it over here, and it just makes a big one. So it's easy to share with machines, because what often happens is in a plant, they buy another first machine. They have the first step, so they can't get enough through, so they buy a second first step machine. Well, now second step is way behind. So then they buy another second, and you're going to go all the way through the plant, and then you're going to come around and do it again because you're not utilizing what you have. Probably happens in the software world too, is we need more front end software, but then it just gets stuck at quality, right? And then we can't get it implemented and all those types of things. So those are some of the challenges. So the first one is make it visual and share it at the broad thing. The second one is how critical cross training is. So we're not aware of how much it helps us, especially those that are leaders and have been able to dabble in a number of the different roles. Because you can see how the roles interact, you understand the implication of what you're doing and how it's going to impact the next step. And it's under appreciated by leaders generally how powerful cross training is. It's not just so we can cover someone when they're on vacation or if they walk out the door. It's because it brings a much bigger awareness of what am I doing and how does that impact other people in my organization. And so the more that you do that cross training, cross training doesn't just happen. It's important that we make time for it. And so if it's a high priority, we say, hey, every Thursday from 7 to 9 a.m., we're each doing something with somebody else. So we learn this, right? You have to be intentional to be able to get it and consistently get that cross training. So cross training, making things visual and showing what that overall thing is. Again, the more information people have, the better decisions they're going to make.
So another term we encounter is variability. Manufacturing variability, I assume, translates into quality.
Absolutely.
And how do you deal with that?
Absolutely. So I would say there's a number of different things with variability to consider. The first one is that in almost every manufacturing plant I walk into, they're like, hey, we're make to order. We're custom. Like there's no set thing. And I'm sure that's the same way with software, right? If you were just making the same software package over and over, well, then you wouldn't have any development to do. So of course it's going to be, right? So every project may have different scale of how big it is and what it needs to cover and all those things. So that variability, we need to be aware of that, but you follow the same process to get that output. And so that's what I found in manufacturing as well. Even with the fabric covered buildings and the installation, these types of things, you're actually following the same process, even though you're making totally different things. And in the software world, you're developing totally different programs, but the same process is followed. So if we get really good with our job aids for each step in the process and our standard work for each step in the process, it wouldn't matter which type of software program we need to write. We follow the process through and we're going to be successful. So that's what you want to do and build so that your variability is down. The second part to that then, on the variability side, is on how do we make sure that we get the same level of quality for our output, right? How do we put that in place? And so that's where we're going to put things in place. You had talked earlier about earlier in the process reduces cost. So in the manufacturing world, what that means is if my designer thought of it, then manufacturing doesn't have to deal with it. But if the designer didn't, then manufacturing has to come up with a stopgap to make sure it doesn't happen. And then if manufacturing can't, then I got to have quality checks to make sure nothing gets past that. So now I've got design, manufacturing, quality. If we thought about it up front with design, none of these things would have to happen. But if it's not, I've got to put things in place to catch it. So same thing in the software world. If we're working focused on the programming side so that they know what's going to come at the end, then they can design for it so we don't have to put so many things in place. And so that is what can really raise the level of quality and output, is when at the design level, it's understood why they do what they do, and therefore they can incorporate it in so that I don't have to spend the expenses further down. It might take a little more time up front, but look at how much you're going to save, not only in getting it implemented, the next two steps of design, manufacturing and quality, but forever and always, manufacturing and quality have to keep doing those inspections and its checks. If it gets designed in, it's a one-time cost, and then I don't have that expense anymore. So that's my answer to the variability one. Focus on the design and make sure that you've got your whole thing set up as a process. So really, regardless of what the software requirements or what the customer requirements are, we follow the same process to get there. Of course, there's going to be one-offs and we got to bring in extra resources for this and that, but have your process defined.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think software development, it being, more or less cognitive work, there is a lot of variability in there. And, it is kind of, I think there are like methods like Agile and others, which has come across, really improved the situation from scalable developments, right, where you have many, many developers working on the same project. And but it suffers a lot more, like, the output of manufacturing processes, in my opinion, a lot more consistent than, say, from a software point of view, the outcomes from software. And I think we in the software industry can definitely learn from this. How can you reduce your variability? So that's a very important and a great insight. So we talked about all along the lean principles about continuous learning and thereby improving. You mentioned it in several contexts. So how does this principle look like? Like, how do you inculcate continuous learning and improvement?
Absolutely. So part of the biggest challenge with continuous improvement is sustaining your gains, right? So after we get there, it's kind of like when we do a 5S or an organizational type thing. We can organize an area and then we come back 3 weeks later and it's disorganized again. So what am I going to use to sustain my gains, right? So once again, I need to have a picture of what it's supposed to look like. So everybody knows this is the expectation, right? Then I need to have audits in place or checklists to make sure that weekly it's getting checked, right? See, these are some of the things we can do on the physical side, is take a picture of what it's supposed to look like, have audits to make sure that's being maintained. In a software development, that may be on a weekly basis, we check to see, is code being written the way that we want? Does it have I'll do that later. No, that is the way that we do things. This is our process, right? Some of those types of things that can be done. But as far as continuous improvement, I talked about it already, as in the small steps of continuous improvement that can be done. That is Kaizen. But then Kaizen also can be a team approach. So there are some problems that are just bigger than you or bigger than me. We need a cross-functional team. And this is another way that cross-functional can work together, bring people together to help solve a bigger problem as a Kaizen event. This can be a half-day thing or a 3-day thing. And it's typically guided by somebody that's done many of these things. And we define the problem. Here's our challenge. Maybe it's taking us too long to do this. We have too many quality issues. This type of project always delays us. We don't have the resources we need. Come together as a team, define the current state, what our goal is, and now brainstorm and trial different things to help get us there. And so that trialing as we do it, those bullets first, and then we're going to do the cannonballs. Once we've got it, hey, this really worked on this. Okay, now how do we spread that across the organization? So the Kaizen events are kind of the bigger leaps where we make bigger improvements and we get it going. It starts small, but then if it works, we do it across the organization. That's where we get the bigness. And then we also have the small ones that we're doing on a regular basis. So the whole mindset of people being able to share. We haven't talked much about ideas. People have ideas and we want them. We've got to find a way to facilitate them. So I'm a big fan of ideas. There are many good ideas, but I can't do them all. So I do want your ideas. I want to write them down. Name, date, idea. But at the end of the month, if we have 20 ideas that have been shared, don't run off and do them. Just list them out. Now, as a group, we come together and we say, what are the 3 best ideas? Let's pick the best ideas and let's implement those. And then next month, let's grow our list of ideas again and then pick the 3 best. And what this allows you to do is, number one, not keep running off to go do all these ideas and then nothing gets done anyway. It allows you to focus on the ones that are the best. It allows a collaboration of the team to say, your idea is better than mine, so let's do yours. And this group approach for ideas build on ideas. And so this improvement can be really massive when you start to get that idea ball rolling. And that culture of continuous improvement that we talked about is you have to have a way to facilitate ideas. Make it visual again so everybody can see it and do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I listen to all this, it just seems like it's mostly, these aren't radical, hard things to do, but in a sense that they're complex, but they're hard in the sense that it takes discipline, and discipline is one of the hardest things to find. Yeah, these are excellent ideas. One thing that's popular in the software world is daily stand-up meetings where the whole team meets for 15 minutes, tells everybody what you're doing, any roadblocks, what you've done, what you're going to be doing, any roadblocks. That's the standard format.
Absolutely. So we call those huddles in manufacturing.
Oh, okay.
Right? Getting the huddle, just like before a play. These are professional football teams. They spent the entire week determining what they were going to do already, but they still have a huddle right before, so you don't make the mistake. That's what your daily huddle is, and that's where sharing information. You got to share as much information as you can, not just what are we working on today, but what's going on with the organization, what's going on with these projects, and then that's also where you get the ideas. Hey, and what happened? Has anybody got problems they ran into yesterday? Tell us about it. How did you solve it? Let's all learn it together. That's where that running towards problems and sharing it in that huddle, in that daily meeting, so powerful. It really engages employees. They feel very engaged when their ideas are being shared. They're hearing the information. They're getting daily coaching as to where things are at. They're hearing what other people are going through. It's important. People are like, I kind of do that. I talk to each person. That is so not the same. Everybody needs to be together and hear it together. There's real accountability when you have everyone together on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad to hear that you guys do that. That's great.
Yeah. So as we think about all this, do you have any resources you would suggest for learning about Lean? I mean, obviously, your LinkedIn has been a really good resource for me to follow that. But
absolutely,
other ideas.
There's many good writings and things to be able to see. The Toyota Way by Jeffrey Liker is one of the best books. It's got the 14 principles that are really key to Lean. Mm-hmm. I translate them over to the House of Lean, but that's really what that is. Lean Thinking by James Womack and Daniel Jones is another good one. I like the leadership one of Patrick Lencioni on the motive. He's the one that talks about flipping that word chart, and you are there to serve. And if you have leaders that are not interested in serving, like it's all about me, then they have to carry the whole load themselves, because they are not going to inspire and draw their group along. And they may be able to for a while, but once you get so big, it's not even possible. Mm-hmm. Also, there's tons of YouTube videos on practical applications of this. So if you YouTube things like standard work in Lean or flow in Lean or those types of things, there's others that have done these and they show there's examples. They're happy to share it. So it's much better than wasting your time watching CAP videos. Watch Lean videos on YouTube and get some of these ideas, and you'll see the practical applications, whether it is, I look at the lab behind you, like how do we organize and get all our tools shadow boarded and some of these types of things. Mm-hmm. Really inspiring to see what others have done. And I encourage people to share what you've done as well so that others can learn from it too.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we kind of wrap up this discussion, do you have any advice for young people as they face the industry, work, career?
Yes. I really wish some of these things were taught in the high schools and in colleges about leadership, about humility, about running towards problems, about looking for flow. It's so focused on the technical learning, and the technical learning is such a thin sliver of what needs to be done. Now, if you can't do the technical part, you're not going to be successful with the rest of it either. So you need that part, and you need to embrace these concepts of Lean and how it makes such a difference in recognizing that as a solo contributor, if you're just in your silo contributing, you're limited by everybody else. So if your organization doesn't embrace this, it doesn't matter how awesome you are, it's just not going to get the organization further along. So you've got to be involved in this, encourage your teams, learn it yourself. You can start at any level of leadership. Of course, if it's not from the very top on down, it's going to be a struggle. But whatever level you're at, make sure your entire team is functioning in this manner and continuing to grow. And continuous improvement is is that we still learn from each other. I really thought when I started consulting that I'd be taking organizations from mid-level to the elite in lean. But what I find is most organizations are right at the foundation, and we just got to get them started. And getting them started, there's so much of low-hanging fruit that we can get and move things along, and that builds excitement in people. When they start to see success, and now we're up 30%, or our projects are taking half as long, like that's very exciting to people, and it's that growth that you're going to be able to have, and that builds that momentum for future continuous improvement.
Yeah. So it sounds like at any level of our life, any stage of our life, we can start by applying these ideas personally, and then, all of us we tend to interact with others and work with others. So likewise, these principles soon apply pretty much in any situation. So
Absolutely. I would give one caution with your family. So I do lean all the time for manufacturing for these other companies, and I love to do it with my children and home as well. But there are limits. So for the sanity of my wife and others, you do have to be careful how far you take it. Sometimes it's just life, and it's not meant. Efficiency, this was really staggering to me. Efficiency is not a fruit of the spirit.
Yeah.
And when I recognized and realized that, relationships are important as well. So in work, we need to really focus on these types of things, but building and pulling everyone together is a big part of life as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Cam?
Yeah, I think it was awesome. Thanks, Matthew, for taking time and talking to us. I hope listeners find it, engaging. And if you have feedback, please leave us some good marks. And I think we'll post links to the resources that Matthew talked about in our show notes. Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on, Matthew, and wish you the best in your work and endeavors. So,
my pleasure. Enjoyable to learn about the software space. Thanks for taking time.